Welcome. This is the second session related to the delivery of IT services. We are doing a little bit of a swap up here. What I had initially envisioned was that we would talk about the MSP calculator today and pricing, but what I think would be a little better for us would be we're going to go ahead and just finish up the discussion on IT pricing, technician productivity. I think it'll work a little bit better if we finish up the IT section today, and then next week we'll do full demo and examples of the pricing calculator. We'll show you exactly how that model ties in to the metrics methodologies that we've been discussing here. Run you through a couple of examples. We'll have an open discussion on pricing and how things work, and ideally have quite a bit of interaction next week as well. We'll do that, give you a good overview next week on Thursday, the 21st, on pricing. Now, that calculator is something that everybody uses a little differently. Some folks use it to price their deals up. Others use it to determine individual pricing of components, and then they'll put that into their QuoteWorks or whatever. And then others may use it to go through their own methodology for pricing and then use that as a kind of a double check to see if they're in the right ballpark. If I price it up my way, how does it look if I do it with the tag calculator, and make sure that as long as we're both arriving at the same price to the end user, we're fine. We'll go through that and we'll show you all how it works. It's pretty slick, something that we developed here a couple of years ago. Lane Smith came in, added quite a bit to it, to his credit, so you really have the ability to kind of forecast any product, any brand, any service can be incorporated into it. It's a really great tool, one of the best we've developed by far. Then after that, we'll get into some of the discussions we're going to have to wrap this up on Azure and cloud offerings as well. One thing to reiterate, we are going to be sending out, I believe today, or if not today, it'll be Monday, a request to all of you for that data that we'll be starting to gather for doing your one-on-one financial analysis. We talked a little bit about this week. We want to get that data in sooner rather than later, since there's so many of the companies attending. We can get started on that a little early, and then we'll be doing those one-on-one meetings with you as soon as this course is concluded. So a couple quick recap items from last week where we started. We basically went through kind of some of the financial metrics. First one being that we want MSP sales to contribute about 35%. I always reiterate that we have contribution is the amount of money we have left over after we've paid everybody to deliver and service the product and the whole ops department, and we've paid the sales team and all the sales costs that run along with it. Before overhead, we should have about 35 points coming from MSP. And ideally, if we have about 15% gross overhead, we're going to run about 20 points profit on our MSP business. That's what our goal is, and that aligns with what the top members in TAG are doing. So how do we do this? Well, we obtain this by getting 50% gross margins on both the outsourced services and all of our internal manpower. We have to do this by a couple of ways here, by pricing our MSP bundle with the proper markup on anything we outsource, and then also estimating the amount of internal tech time, and not just the amount of time, but at the proper hourly rate. If you recall last week, we went through two examples where we worked it up to figure out how much per seat we're going to have to charge to get a 50% gross margin. And if our average technician rate is $30, we need to get a realized labor rate in our MSP bundle of $140 an hour, which is about what we should be charging if we were billing that same time by the hour. That's kind of where we left it last week. Now we're going to continue on, and we're going to walk into the remainder of this. When we sell our managed services bundle, we're not billing by the hour, obviously. So we have to sell the unknown number of hours for a fixed price. And we always talk about this. You know, we can have 2 hours on a customer one month and 20 on the next, depending on what happens. But on average, we know how many hours a specific size customer is typically going to entail with what we did last week, where we took the number of PCs and the number of servers, and we can estimate on average, every month will be different, but on average, we should spend a certain amount of hours. and that's how much we will build into our pricing. And if you recall, whether we outsource or don't outsource, we're typically in that $100 to $110 per seat for a customer before BCDR. When we have this here with the unknown number of hours, how do we know if we're in the right place? Well, pricing it properly, like we talked about last week, is key, but we also have to know and calculate what our internal labor's realized labor rate is. This rate must be about $140. If that internal technician rate, your direct hourly rate, is around, averages $30, then hey, this number's got to be about 140 if we want to gross the 50% gross margins. Calculating this is a little different than we would normally do when we're doing partnering plan where we don't have a lot of other outsourced costs. We can just take our revenue for a voice partnering plan and divide by the number of hours spent, and we can get an internal labor rate. It's going to be similar with my example I'm about to show you of what we're going to do. How do we calculate it in IT? First, we take the revenue related to our own labor, which I'm going to define, and then obviously the same way we would do it with any other is to divide by the number of hours we applied to service those MSP customers. So the revenue related to our internal labor is going to be our total MSP revenue less the amount we spend on outsourced costs times 2. Why is that? Why would we take our MSP revenue and not back out our outsourced costs, but back out twice our outsourced cost? Does anybody have a guess or want to volunteer an answer? Dale, you don't count. You know the answer. Does anybody have an idea? Even if it's a guess? No, there's no wrong answers here. Any guesses? Why would we take 2 times the outsourced cost? Paul.
Because there's a gray area and not knowing how many hours are going to be able to use. Is that a buffer that you're leaving us?
No, that's a good suggestion. The reason we're doing it is because, as you recall last week, actually, Paul, I'm not sure if you were on last week, but we talked about the core metric of IT is, hey, guess what? We got to get 50% gross margins, both on the outsourced things that we buy and resell, like help desk, like a NOC, like monitoring, like BCDR solutions, all the things that we're buying from other sources and reselling to our customers. And we also have to get a 50% gross margin on our internal time. Essentially, the core metric all flows back to one concept, and that's, hey, we got to get 50% gross margins if we want to have a fighting chance of putting 20 points to the bottom line, guys. When we look at realized labor rate, this is kind of a metric that'll tell us if we're on track. We're going to take our total MSP revenue and we are going to deduct twice the outsourced costs because we know that we do need to get a 50% gross margin on those items as well. What is remaining is the revenue for our internal tech time. Let's put this in a real world example using some nice round numbers so that this concept gets very clear here. If we had total MSP revenue, let's say this is an annual revenue, we look at 2020 and we had $1 million of MSP revenue. How much of that is related to our outsourced cost and how much of that $1 million is paying for the services that my internal techs are delivering? We don't know. So the idea is if we can use 2x the internal or the outsourced cost, we can estimate what our labor rate is for the internal tech time. So how would that work? If we had on our P&L outsourced cost of $300,000 and $1 million in total revenue, so we've got 2 times the outsourced cost would be $600,000, and that is, hey, guess what? I got to get 50% gross margins. That's the core message of IT is if we can get 50% gross margins, our sales cost will be what they will be, our overhead's going to be what it's going to be, but it all strives from the delivery of services at a 50% gross margins to get there. So we have to start there. If I've got $300,000 in cost, I need to assume, do I not, that $600,000 of my $1 million is covering the outsourced cost. If I do that, that means By simple math, again, we're going to have $400,000 is associated with my internal tech time. Does that make sense to everybody? So let's take it further and figure out what our rate might be. If we've got $400,000 is the amount of revenue that's associated with my internal guys, not with anything that I'm outsourcing and buying, reselling. And I go to my ConnectWise, I go to my TigerPaw, I go to my AutoTask, and obviously we all should have the ability to tell how much time was logged to servicing this $1 million of revenue, or the 400,000 that's related to my internal tech time. How much time did I spend on service tickets for these customers? We should have the ability to know how many hours we spent working on problems for these guys. We're not billing by the hour, but we should certainly know how many hours we spent servicing MSP customers. And if you don't have the ability to look into that, let's chat offline, because that's the first thing we need to fix before we'll ever have any handle on whether we're good, bad, or indifferent at delivering any services, not just MSP. We really do have to know where the labor is getting spent. If we do that, and I'm just going to pull a broad number, if we pulled that number and it said, hey, guess what? Over the course of 2020, your technicians logged 2,900 hours of actual time to service your $1 million of revenue, or the 400,000 that we've determined is related to the internal tech time. So you go to your TigerPaw, you go to your ConnectWise, or whatever PSA you use, and it shows you how many hours were spent on this type of ticket. Well, that's how we get it. If we divide the two, we've got around $138 an hour here. So we're pretty close to our target of 140. We're pretty close. So in this case, we would say, gosh, this looks pretty good. Our internal labor rate target is almost hit. Ideally, on our P&L, if we are really looking all the way down the line as an MSP bucket, we're probably doing okay and closing in on that 20% gross net profit. If we're allowing for 15% sales costs and 15% overhead, we have a real fighting chance of putting 20 points to the bottom line. Maybe even more than that to the bottom line if our sales costs are fairly light, which sometimes they are if owners are doing the selling. But let's assume a full marketing advertising budget. We've got base pay and commissions. We've got all the perks, maybe even a small assignment for a sales manager if you had one. If that all comes to about 15% of sales, that's what we're assuming. If your individual solution is or individual situation is less than that, then you might be able to make a little bit more. So in this case, I would say this company's probably there. If we were to analyze their MSP business, they would probably be putting 20 points or close to it to the bottom line if they have the estimates of 15% each or so for sales, G&A. Now, if we take the same company and we look in and we show 3,800 hours, then all of a sudden our realized labor rate is 105. Okay, that's obviously not good, because we know that if our technician rate is $30 an hour, we should be targeting around 140, as this metric should be closer to 140. So what does this tell us? Well, we may have an issue. Is it an issue with staffing? Is it an issue with pricing? Gosh, I don't know. We know what our outsource cost is. We know we want to get a 50% gross margin there. So we may have an issue across the board, but it doesn't tell us necessarily where. But we can kind of figure it out. If we don't actually average 140 an hour, what is that cause? The cause really just means, hey, guess what? We either have one of two things. We either have too much labor getting utilized for these customers, and this again is looking at an annual, all the customers, all the good, the bad, the ugly, all the one-offs. On average, we're spending more time than we should. Or we're spending the right amount of time, but we're not charging enough for it. It sounds simple because it's really one of those two things, but we know that it's got to be one of the two. Either we're not bringing in enough money, or we're spending too much time, or gosh, it could be a little bit of a combination of both. Any questions before I move on to the next piece? Because that's really important, is that if we measure this and we're not measuring up to where we need to be with realized labor rate, then that just means that there's a canary in the coal mine, really. It doesn't tell us necessarily where our issue is. It just tells us that we probably are not making 20 points to the bottom line if that's the case, because we are not realizing enough in that realized labor rate. Let me just stop there. Is there any questions?
The only thing I'll add to this, Tim, is that this is why it's so important when we talk to you about tracking hours and time and having the proper codes and how you pay for your labor. Because without that information, we're not going to be able to pull the right information. So it starts with your CRM and it starts with your billing system. Just a comment.
I have a question, just or maybe a comment on that. Dale, obviously you're working aggressively with Amy and us to get our ticketing system in place, and it's working now. I believe it is. I think we're doing things properly. We obviously can't calculate this now because we didn't have a proper ticketing system. How long of a history, and I don't know if this applies to anybody else in the group, are we going to need? I mean, do you think we can do that with a month accurately? I mean, or I guess it's going to be something we're going to be watching closely going on as we're making tweaks over the next couple months.
Yeah, a monthly number, a monthly number gives you a pretty good indication and a track. So it's a start. But yes, your question.
Well, and I think the shorter the period, the more susceptible it is to fluctuations. Obviously, if you look at a year, you smooth out all the slow month, busy month, one-offs, odd things happening. You put a ton of hours in one month, not a lot the next month. I would start tracking it monthly because that'll give you at least that picture, but it will fluctuate. And once you get to the end of Q1 in March, say you have 3 full months, well, then you have something you can really base conclusions on, because the realized labor rate might fluctuate over these 3 months, but the average of the 3 is probably a pretty good indication of the direction you're going. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and the other thing too, Paul, is that when you get into the pricing calculator, you're going to be able to determine whether your pricing is correct. Okay. I mean, there's a couple of tests that you can make as you look at the last number of deals you did, pricing with the calculator, and see how far you're off. That's why we have a whole separate session on how to use the calculator.
Yep.
Sounds good.
Guys, this is David Johnson.
And that would be the first. Hey, David.
Hi.
Go ahead.
We were actually getting the guys using time entry for the first time. And then a couple guys come up and they were like, well, what if I was doing this for 5 minutes for the customer, And I'm like, well, you need to be charging them a minimum of 15. That's our minimum charge. And they were struggling with trying to understand that. So I built a calculator showing them the effect of that. If everybody gave a customer 15 minutes a day, and by the end of the year, it was a $40,000 difference. And it really helped them to see that. Honestly, it was a huge eye opener for them. They knew that, hey, that's an entire employee's pay almost. At 30 minutes a day, it was pay of one person plus another. It was really eye opening to them to see that, and they've all been working very diligently to make sure they're accurate now. I think it really worked to help them out. And I actually talk to our copier division about the same thing, and to give them a better perspective of how they're impacting things.
Yeah, that's a great point. And when we talked a couple of sessions ago about hourly rates, one of the things that was, I believe, one of the examples we talked about is the difference that 15 minutes makes in billable rates. So there's 2 different things here. There's the time that your guys log, which is, okay, I was working on this issue from 12:05 to 12:25. And then the other issue is how that may get billed if it's for an hourly customer of any sort. The amount of money that we lose by not billing for little things or only billing for 15 minutes when we really should be billing for a 30-minute minimum is astronomical when you really add it up and you have a lot. For hourly billing, that's very, very true. And for this, we have to be very diligent about the time tracking, time spent, not necessarily worried about the billing, because these are all MSP customers. Obviously, the work we're going to do is included. That's what we sell them. We sell them, hey, pay us $2,100 a month for your company of 20 people with 3 servers, and here's all the services you get. If anything breaks, we're fixing it, we're monitoring it, we're proactively remediating things to make sure everything runs smoothly, all the things you give them in your bundle. But we really need to know what's our time input. Because you can see on that last example, we're spending 2,900, 3,000 hours. Hey, we're in the right ballpark. If we're spending 3,800 or 4,000 hours, then all of a sudden our hourly yield, because the amount of money we're getting is the same. Those X number of customers are paying us $1 million, whether we put in 4,000 hours or 3,000 hours. And think about that. What's 1,000 hours times your hourly rate plus labor load and all the things that have to go into supporting that person? That's a lot of money, but you're not getting any more dollars. So the dollars are fixed. They're paying you a fixed amount no matter what. And if we're efficient in delivering those hours, on average, we have some that are kind of takers and they draw a lot more. And we have some that we take the money from and we don't hear from very much because everything runs pretty smooth. But the average should be definable. The average should be predictable. It's going to blow out of the water from month to month sometimes if something blows up. But on a quarterly average or a 2-quarter average, when you're looking at 6 months, we should be delivering our services with a high amount of precision in the average number of hours. So let's walk through the whys of things don't work correctly, what we just talked about. If we don't realize the $140, why is it? Well, it could be that we have budgeted the hours incorrectly. Last week, we spoke about...
Tim, can I ask a quick question? Can I ask a quick question about that? What about clients that the initial onboarding costs? So sometimes you got to do a lot of cleanup when you go into a new client. Like we're finding that, do you suggest charging upfront for an onboarding cost, or do you wait and realize further down the line when the hours actually go down after the initial cleanup or onset of hours in the beginning? Like, how do you account for that?
Yes. When you said your question was, should we charge an onboarding fee? Yes, period.
Perfect. Thank you.
The typical onboarding is 1 month's charge. So if you're billing somebody $2,000 a month for their MSP package, we'll usually bill $2,000 to cover all the time of gathering the information, onboarding the customers, getting all the information over to a Continuum or ConnectWise now. All the time and effort that takes is not free. We start with that, and if you have a difficult customer where, okay, not only do they need the regular onboarding, but they need replacement of servers, they need all kinds of network stabilization work to happen just to get them to a point where we can manage it, then that is a project that is not included in, obviously, the monthly MSP that you're billing them. So if they need some network remediation on the front end just to get them up to a reasonable status, then typically that's billed up front. You should always have an onboarding fee that will just cover the standard time to bring someone on. If their network is fine and all the equipment's fine, there's no project work to do, there's still a fair amount of time just to bring them over and get them all set up properly. So that time is usually covered with a one-time fee.
And that's typically what we do is one time of the monthly recurring costs. I was just checking, the way you guys recommend it.
That is exactly what we do, unless you believe that it will take more. If you have a problem customer, you need to bill more than just 1 month. We always reserve the right to say, don't write this in stone as, oh, we only charge 1 month. No, you charge what you think it'll take to do the work. And if it's significantly higher than 1 month, don't get locked into that box and not charge enough. So
yeah, and one way we've done that with a lot of our customers, they don't buy the hardware outright. They're doing it as hardware as a service from us. We build in, so like they're talking about the project of, for example, cleaning up the network, which would be more deep than just the initial onboarding. We will sell them switches at a monthly cost that includes our estimated labor rate.
Yeah, sounds like you're doing it exactly right. You need to make sure that you're getting at least enough to offset the hard cost that you have of. Sometimes we don't make a lot of money on that onboarding, but we are not going to lose money. That's antithetical.
Perfect. Okay,
to our
awesome.
philosophy.
Thank you. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, Tim, I have one quick question that maybe it's kind of on the same line. I'm hoping you just give me a quick answer. As far as assessments, I've heard a lot of different charging on the per seat and all that. And we've got a couple, one it's probably bigger than we should be dealing with. We're working with Lane some on that, but is there a general rule of thumb, or is that another class that I'm asking ahead as far as assessment charging?
For prospective
yeah, well, I mean,
customer?
like we have one that has 500 endpoints right now, and corporate is, well, let's say we're supposed to quote on corporate and their location that has their disaster recovery. I think there's probably 150 endpoints at corporate, maybe 100 at the other location. We're trying to determine how to quote those two in terms of assessment. and then of course we have other ones. We've got another one we're working on that's only like 15 people. So I didn't know if there was the same rule of thumb. I mean, obviously I know to put in travel time if we're having to go somewhere in that, but I didn't know if there was a per seat cost. I've heard some people say charge $150 a seat. I've heard some people say $50 a seat. Is there a general rule of thumb or?
Well, I mean, if you can even charge to put a proposal in front of them, you are talking about how much time should be put into just evaluating what a quote might look like. I mean, you want to put as little time as possible into that, enough to give them a reasonable quote or a range quote. Maybe Dale has thought on that, but you're not going to be able to charge for a quote unless it is a very large project. Sometimes
this is a sizable, I mean, from what I've heard, that when we're doing
Paul, quick answer to that, Paul, is that if you're going to have technician time preparing those proposals on these large things, I consider it a cost of sales. So you have a sales number and you put the cost of sales, and that's what it is. Now, when you're dealing with projects like that, if you can get away with a initial cost, but you know what, the bottom line is you want the deal. And we don't want to put roadblocks in front of the company or the salesperson of getting to the point of at least being able to ask for the order. It's a judgmental thing. You keep your numbers straight.
Makes sense.
On your timesheet, it's sales support, boom. And you can look at the end of the month, you can look at the end of the year, how much time are you guys spending on sales support, and just make sure that gets charged it goes into your sales cost.
Okay.
Yep.
Makes sense. I've also heard from other people that you show them the charge. I've heard some people say charge $25 a seat. We've dealt with a lot of different consultants, and I know a lot of them are flaky, and then they say, come in and you tell them that this is the charge for the assessment, but if you sign up with our program that are offering, then we'll waive this fee.
I find that a little cheesy, and I find that offensive, but once again, that's just my opinion. The answer here is that those kind of little tricks and manipulations, everyone sees through that. All right. And all it does is put the customer at a point where, what are they doing? Here's what we know.
I agree, Dale.
Easier it is to do business with you, the higher probability you're going to get the business. And the end result is we want to close the sale. So,
makes sense. Right. I got it. It makes total sense. Great. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good question. Last thing I'll say on that is if you do end up determining that you're doing an inordinate amount of time, hours and hours and hours, doing engineering work for deals that you don't get, then I would probably tell you to take it offline with us and say, hey, what are we doing wrong? Because unless it's a very massive and complex deal, hopefully we shouldn't be spending a whole lot of time on the front end, because you're not going to get every deal. It's important to make sure you're doing enough research and enough engineering to give them a reasonable quote, with the caveat of you're not going to uncover every nook and cranny in their network that needs assistance until you really get in there and deal it. So you have to have the ability to move if things are not what they seem. With a preliminary investigation, here's the quote, subject to change. That's kind of the way we see most of them go over it.
That makes sense. Right. This particular one, when they first approached us, I mean, it was, we want you to do an assessment. We want you to go to 50 locations that are 4 hours apart from here to here. We want you to physically inspect all of the hardware. We want you to do a full cybersecurity assessment. So, I mean, we're talking huge.
And
really sizable.
They're also just, this is not a typical request for assessment, because it's not an assessment like what we do. They're asking for us to assess their business plan. They're asking us to assess their amount of IT staff that they've got. And then they also want us to do a survey of their staff to get an IT perception of what IT is.
Their satisfaction level.
That's chargeable, guys. That's a whole different subject.
Absolutely.
It has nothing to do with our business. That's a different
for sure.
business. That's a consultant businesses. And then the decision is, are you in that or not in that? There's a couple ways you can handle that, but I think we can handle that offline.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
I just wanted to
didn't mean to get in on a tangent on that, and Lane is helping us too, but that's
Awesome.
That's great.
Good questions. We always want to have a lively discussion. So thank you, Paul. We're getting back to this now. Why would, if we have a mismatch in our realized labor rate, what are the reasons why? Okay, well, it could be that our budgeted hours are incorrect. We went over those budgeted hours last week, where if we're not outsourcing, we're going to estimate a certain number of hours per PC, a certain number of hours per server, and we build that in to our bundle. We do a little less if we're outsourcing because we know that some of those calls, or hopefully a lot of those calls, majority of them are going to go out to a Continuum or some sort of outsourced help desk. I always call them Continuum, but I know they're ConnectWise now. We have those estimates of hours that we build into our bundle when we hand the pricing over to the customer. If our budgeted hours are incorrect, that's unique because the budgets that we've used here match the industry standards. They match the metrics that come out of places like the Pomeroy, which had a 700-seat call center and years of data it matches right along lines with those. And the folks in TAG, when we go and look at their results and the amount of hours they're spending as a function of how many PCs and servers, these endpoints they have, it matches up with those as well. Provided that we have a good contract and the MSP agreement has some sort of limitation, potentially on on-site hours, or if not that, it has a very clear delineation between what is project work and what is not project work. And I'll get into that in a slide or two. These metrics match what the best in the business are doing. There's no deviation. It really aligns 100% with what we see in actuality, feet on the street, in the field. What else could it be? Well, it could be that the hours are right, but we're underpricing our bundle in other ways. And if we don't price in a way that allows us to get 50% gross margins on both the outsource cost and our internal resources. Contract structure, what I just mentioned, we have to have a solid contract that does not allow for wiggle room. What happens when there's a gray area in a contract? You say tie goes to the runner in baseball. Well, guess what? Customer's always right. If you do not specify it and have clear structure on your contract, you're going to end up giving away things that really should be billable. That is probably there's three reasons why people, when I do the analysis, why they're not making money in IT. They're underpriced, they're overstaffed, or some combination of both of those. And a third problem they run into is when they first got into IT, they just grabbed a contract, they grabbed the business. Pretty much the customers got used to saying, hey, whatever I need, whenever I need it, it's all covered under my monthly bill. It shouldn't be like that. So we might end up with have over-applied hours that really should be billable project work that are now no longer billable, and they're applied to the MSP revenue. That may be why we have 4,000 hours applied instead of 3,000. We recommend a cap on on-site hours. There's a good methodology to do that, to basically have either a definition in your contract of specifically what is billable versus not, or you have a limit, depending on the size of the customer, of, okay, we will remediate 100% remote, unlimited, and then on-site, anything that requires on-site is limited to 4 hours a month, 6 hours a month, whatever it might be. But that's another good way because that's where things go sideways. Think of it this way. Dale at iNet, if a customer called up and said, hey, guess what? I've got 30 PCs that are infected. You guys need to come out and unwind all those PCs that got infected. We would probably not do that at 1 or 2 hours per and not charge them anything, I would think, right? Okay, so what does this happen now? What happens is less project revenue. So let's say, you have $80,000 in project revenue, and it really should be $200,000 in project revenue. But guess what? That 120 grand didn't get billed. So that's a real cash impact to you, is it not? And we end up just applying it to their MSP contract. So if that happens, you have lower project revenue, and you have all those hours getting dumped into the bucket that is applied towards that MSP revenue. That is a very easy way for it to skew that realized labor rate. Why? Well, because now instead of, in my example, 2,900 hours, now I have 3,400 hours because I did all this work for free and it's now applied to the MSP contract. It's just another, again, indicator that we may have an issue to go in and look at and try to determine where we have an issue. The most profitable MSPs maximize their realized labor rate. And the key is successfully estimating that manpower coverage and knowing when to hire. We include the outsourced services at 50% gross margins when we price it up to begin with. and then we measure and understand our actual technician productivity. Now let's talk real quick, a couple slides here on technician productivity. You know, how much time should our technicians be productive? We should all say it in unison because it's the one metric that is across the board. It's in every class or peer group that you may take, it's 75%. We define productive as deployed. And we talked about this when we were a couple sessions ago. We brought this very same topic up when we talked about hourly and how we're efficient in delivering break-fix services on an hourly basis or delivering project work on an hourly basis. We need to know where our technicians are, and what we do is we define it this way, because we've realized that everyone defines productive or deployed kind of a little different way. So when we look at your business, we're going to say productive quote unquote time is really any time that is actively engaged with a paying customer. They're doing something for a paying customer. It doesn't matter if the customer is paying by the hour or they're paying on an MSP contract. It's a customer and it's customer facing. So if our technician is on site, if we're working remotely, if we're doing any prep or material gathering for a large project, that does take time, or we're traveling to and from. Anything else is downtime. All the other time we pay people that's not customer facing, it's meetings, it's training, it's sick days, holidays, vacations. If we have a Monday morning huddle that's 1 hour, guess what? That's 1 hour a week. Now you only have 39 hours to potentially be productive. Or it may be just slow time. They're sitting around. We do have time that people are actually not productive because they're talking about the game over the weekend and things like that. But really, we're not really making a determination. We're just saying, hey, look, if it's not customer facing, we're going to call it downtime or office time. We're able to measure the time spent by technician. If we look at a technician for the year, 2,080 hours is if they worked 40 hours a week, we need 75% of that time deployed. Think about that. That's only 1,500 hours out of 2,000 that we need on tickets for a paying customer deployed in some manner. All the other time, the meetings, the training, the PTO, internal IT time, if we work on our own internal network, that's included in kind of quote unquote downtime. It doesn't mean it's not useful, not valuable, but we just say it's not deployed in service of a paying customer. And think about that. That's 500 out of 2,000 hours. That's almost 3 months a year. We are paying our employees when we add in their vacation, sick days, and all this other time that's really not customer facing. We're paying them 3 months out of the year to not service our customers. And you know what's funny is a lot of us don't even get 75%. That's not a medium number. That is what the best in the business are doing, are getting 75%. This is an easy thing for us to measure. If we take our technicians' time and it's measured properly, we know how many hours we paid them. We paid them 2,080 hours during 2020. How many hours were on tickets and how many were logged to downtime? We have to have 100% visibility into that time to know. And if we average 75%, good. That's about where you should be, and that's what the best top 20% of TAG members are doing, and that's a long-standing metric in both the voice and the IT industry. So what does this mean? For every 1,000 hours we pay, we're going to get about 750 hours deployed in service of those paying customers. If I know I need 750 hours, I'm going to have to budget 1,000 when I'm doing a manpower estimate. And we do that in the financial analysis. When we build your labor profile, we'll determine what's your optimum staffing based on the revenue you have, based on the endpoints you support. Well, and then when we figure out how many hours should be required by that revenue level and that customer level, we're going to actually bump it up by that 25% because we know that we will need to spend that many more hours to get the required number of productive hours. But how realistic is it really to manage productivity in this manner, where we're trying to manage the individuals within our business, making sure they're productive? It's very difficult to manage individual productivity, and we're not allowed necessarily to cut hours here and there. We're not allowed, but we typically don't cut hours. We hire somebody full-time, and we try to give them enough time to fill that 40 hours a week. And if they're not that productive, is it because they're not being efficient? Or is it because we don't have enough business to fill their plate? It could be one of the two. So what do we control when we do our business? Well, we can control headcount. If we had 10 technicians and one leaves, we can stick with 9. We can not rehire, or if we had to let someone go, or God forbid it gets bad enough that we actually are laying people off, we can control our headcount. That just means really plus or minus 2,080 available hours per year. We typically we can't hire two-thirds of a technician. Very, very, very few tag members have part-timers with variable hours. We typically have the technicians, we hire them, and we try to get the most productivity we can out of them. So we can control our headcount. In most cases, that means plus or minus 1 FTE. We have 10 technicians, well, we can hire another. Now we have 11. Now we have another 2,000 hours of available time that we got to fill. We can go down to 9, we can go down to 8. We can control the headcount in our business. We can control sales volume. And I wish it was like this. Dale, you should laugh at this. Wouldn't it be easy if we could just turn up the dial on sales? Wouldn't that help? When we need to, if we have a little bit of excess capacity in our technician stable of available hours, now let's just turn up the sales. If it was that easy,
Well,
if it was that easy,
we'd
just
have to
turn
give
it
it
up,
away.
right?
Yeah, we can turn up sales, just give it away.
Yeah, if it's free, then people will take it, right? But really, those are the two things that we truly can control in our business. If we have excess capacity, more technicians than we technically need, we should be able to go out and land a few more customers and give those employees more work to fill their plate. And that's the green field that we all have. We have the ability, if we know we have excess capacity, we can go out and gain new business without any incremental costs, because we should have the capacity to do that within the number of folks that we have currently. When we look at technician productivity, it's really difficult. We really can only manage our headcount. We typically aren't going to keep technicians very long. If we have them work 40 hours when we're busy and then tell them to only come in 25 hours next week and then 30 hours the week after. We don't run our businesses that way. We're unable to expand and contract the number of hours based on the work we have. So really all we can do is add plus or minus 1 technician at a time. So we have to pay all these productive technicians 40 hours per week or 2,080 hours a year. So managing individual productivity is kind of a misnomer. It really means measuring their potential productivity, meaning how much business they should be able to absorb if we have enough business to give them. It's measuring the potential productivity against what our actual revenue is in T&M, hourly labor, and MSP. Because really in IT, those are the two labor-related places. Do we have enough hourly labor to give them? T&M, break fix, or project labor that's charged by the hour? And then how much revenue we're gaining from MSP and how many hours that should typically take. Last thing on this, and then we'll go through couple more slides and then open it up to some questions, is we want you to measure your deployed versus non-deployed time. What I mentioned is look at your 2020, you know how many hours you spent paying people, because that's on the end of the technician payroll reports. It'll give you all the hours, regular and overtime, if you pay technicians overtime. How many hours did they work in total across every technician? Then go and look in your TigerPaw ConnectWise PSA and determine how much was spent in time of paying customers. If you can't do that, then that's question number 1, because that's the first thing you got to fix. Otherwise, all of the other things you're going to do to make yourselves more efficient, you'll never be able to really measure how well you're doing. If you can, measure and see if you are getting a ratio of 75% customer facing or better, what we say is deployed. And if you are not where you need to be, then you certainly can either increase sales, go out and get new customers and not hire more people. Or let's say you have some attrition and you just say, well, gosh, we were overstaffed and we had one technician leave us, retire, take another job. You know when to make the call to say, let's not hire another technician just yet. Let's absorb that loss of a person and see if we can be a little bit more efficient with the delivery of services. So last thing we're going to talk about is probably the most important question that we ever ask ourselves as business people. It doesn't matter what business you're in. It doesn't matter if you own the place or if maybe you run a department and you have a staff in a large company responsible for hiring and firing. The quintessential question when do I hire the next technician? It's really hard to do. And when do I hire the next employee in my accounting department? When do I hire the next person in HR or administrative support, whatever? The hardest thing we do is know when we should hire the next person. And here's my philosophy on this, and I may have said it in a prior class. We hire based on how busy we feel. And that's a hard thing for an accountant to say. I mean, my stock and trade is numbers, it's business, it's analysis, it's getting under the hood. And even when I ran a, 15 to 18 person department that did HR, payroll, and accounting for a larger company in my early days, we tended to hire based on how busy we were. Now, are we busy because we have too much work, or are we busy because we have some inefficiencies in the way we're doing business? And when I say inefficiencies, I typically don't mean laziness or poor employees. I just mean systems and, how hard would it be to be overstaffed, or how hard would it be to have 4 hours a week of overtime, 10%. So instead of paying 40 hours on average, we're paying 44. Like every employee is working on average 4 hours of overtime a week. We typically would say, okay, it must be time to hire because we're paying all that overtime. That's only 10% more. Is it that we have 10% too much work, or is it potentially that we have the ability to tighten our operations by just 10% efficiency? The reason I say that is because it's super important. We never really know when to hire the next technician. And a lot of times, for those of you on this call, no offense to ops managers, if anybody are on here, but typically when we feel slammed, we go to the owner and we say, hey, we need to hire another technician. We can't do the work. We can't get in the wall. That may be true, but we really need to put numbers behind it. We really need to have some methodology. And so one of the things that we do is we talk about, okay, when should we hire? Well, first thing is you need to make sure you're getting 75% efficiency, 75% customer-facing time. If you're not, you don't hire. And we should also be looking at realized labor rate. And if we are realizing $140 an hour on our internal tech time, and we're getting that amount is the correct amount that we should be billing on hourly basis. If we're realizing $140 an hour, then we potentially could hire. And the calculation, we already gone through this, is the revenue less 2 times our outsourced cost equals the revenue that is applicable and recognized for our own internal labor. So we take that dollar amount, divide by the number of hours that our technicians told us through our PSA, how many hours did you spend servicing this type of customer? It's based on their time logs that they told us how much time they spent servicing those customers, and that'll give us a realized labor rate. So we only hire when we have the right amount of efficiency in terms of 75% at a minimum of tech time is utilized in customer-facing tickets, and in MSP, we're doing that calculation, and we are averaging $140 an hour. All right, last slide, we'll get through some questions here. So just to recap here, we want to track and measure realized labor rate. If that labor rate is low, it means we either are underpricing our offering, or we're overspending on labor, or in a lot of times it's a little bit of both. So we're going to review our pricing with the MSP calculator with our demo and explanation next week. And then we need to adjust our MSP business by, if we know we're not as efficient as we should be, by either lowering headcount through attrition or not replacing someone, or potentially if we need to, if we lay off, we can certainly lay people off if we had to. Or the preferable way to say, okay, I have 10 technicians, I really only have the amount of business to support 8, so I know I have 2 full-time equivalents as excess capacity. Well, that's good news too. Now I know that I can go out and I should be able to land a significant amount of additional business without having to hire more people. So the preferable way would be, hey, go out and increase that sales volume without hiring and increasing any cost. It's a bit of a blend between pricing, staffing, and those kinds of things. That is it. We will get into the pricing calculator next week and answer a lot more questions, hopefully. Any questions on what we discussed today from anyone?